Okay, this is on. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Priscilla de la Cruz. I am the Director of Sustainability for the City of Providence, and I will be moderating this afternoon's panel named City Hall Goes Green. So in this panel, City Hall Goes Green, we'll dive into the discussion on how local communities, municipalities, public education institutions can lead the way on clean energy efforts for taking meaningful action on climate change, whether it is investing in energy efficiency or solar energy to stabilize their costs as they're driving down emissions, investing in new electric vehicle car infrastructure, or really adapting to a changing climate and ensuring that they are resilient in the face of climate change. So we will dive into all of that and talk about how it is possible and how it's actually already happening. We are seeing that cities and towns, like the city of Providence, is where the vision that drives policies and markets become a reality, where implementation and innovation is happening. So in the city of Providence, we're really leading into our Lead by Example initiative. And what we do in the city of Providence is all tied to our climate justice plan. In 2023, Mayor Smiley signed into law the Energy Efficiency and Carbon Neutral Ordinance, committing the city to double down on reducing emissions in our public municipally owned buildings. So what that means for us is that by 2040, we will phase out fossil fuels from all of our public buildings. So my Department of Sustainability, working with the administration and our peers, we were tasked with creating a decarbonization roadmap that assessed 130 buildings, including our school buildings, to see how are we strategically going to make the necessary investments to change the way we heat, power, and manage these buildings. And at the same time, really putting to use the assets that we have, which are our municipal buildings. So we're looking into more innovative projects. We actually have a microgrid pilot in the works. We are deploying solar energy. And yes, we're doing that in the absence of federal support, but also we know that some of the ITC credits for solar are about to sunset. So we're moving fast and we're moving strategically. We're also, as we are electrifying our buildings, also identifying opportunities, not only where we could deploy solar, but also where we could look at creating district heating loops. We know that we're making historic investments and upgrading our schools. So it's about how we do that and how we also do that collaboratively, working with partners in the industry and also with the utility. And we also are working hand in hand with the city council when we think about what is the dedicated funding that we need to continue to sustain those investments. So we recently announced a green revolving fund where we are going to it has an initial seed funding of $3 million, but the idea is that as we invest in projects, the savings, the incentives and rebates of the funded projects, will come back into that green revolving fund. So it's about longevity. It goes beyond the Smiley administration. We're just committed to really creating solutions that are going to stick with the city and the communities for decades to come and ensure that there is revenue dedicated towards improving our public spaces that the community relies on. So that's just an example of how communities in the city, one that I am a proud resident of and also happen to work for, how we are leaning into leading by example. And that is just talking about what we're doing when it comes to driving down emissions and investing in our buildings. But we're doing a lot more when it comes to resiliency because we're feeling the impacts of climate change. So it's an honor to moderate this panel. I'm excited for you to hear from our panelists. I'm going to actually let them introduce themselves so they can tell you in a few minutes their background and how they think about the topic we're about to dive into. So, George, you have the mic now.
Thank you very much. My name is George Sfinarolakis. I work for the State Energy Office, the Office of Energy Resources. I'm managing the program Lead by Example that we provide support to all state government to improve the energy infrastructure and also municipalities and school districts. The current administration has issued an executive order that asks the state government to lead by example in energy issues, and we have a very quantitative targets to reduce emission, to invest in sustainable transportation with charging stations, electric vehicles, and improve in general the stock of our facilities in terms of energy consumption. This is a very active program. We have funding mostly from RICEW proceeds and from and the federal government and state government. So it's a robust program. On average, I think our program provides funds about 8 million to state and local government. And the specific target is implementation of energy projects. So our focus is narrow, do things that improve the energy performance of facilities at the state and local government. We will be happy to tell you more details later on, but as the mission of our program is to support the public sector in Rhode Island to follow a clean, affordable, reliable energy future for Rhode Islanders.
Thank you, George. John, over to you.
I'm John Castrinas. I'm a hydrogeologist with Haley & Aldrich based in Boston. Haley & Aldrich is a geotechnical engineering firm, and I lead the geothermal practice there. So if you don't know what geotechnical engineering is, well, you're forgiven. It's kind of a niche. But we do a lot of work in designing building foundations, right, based in Boston, but we've done a lot of work in Hartford and other cities. So you might think that in progressive cities like Boston, Providence, New York City, that they would really be embracing geothermal, putting them in their buildings to meet local codes, etc. But most of the the progressive thinking and most the actual advances in geothermal are coming out of municipalities. All right, so they've got the carbon goals, decarbonization goals. They've got a longer view than most commercial real estate developers who are trying to turn around a property as quickly and cheaply as possible quite often. And they're doing things like putting together geothermal districts. Framingham, Massachusetts, for example. Cambridge, Massachusetts has been building geothermal for years now. So, and they're also encouraging and helping to fund schools who have been very active in geothermal. So it's exciting to see, and the developers really had some catching up to do. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I have to say, I when you mentioned Framingham, like we've reached out to them, our director of energy operations, and I have to say between municipalities, like the way that we're able to also share information and learn from one another. So I appreciate you bringing up those examples. Kristin, over to you.
Kristin Rhody, the Executive Director of Northeast Renewable Energy Coalition, and we are a grassroots-built organization where we spend most of the year out in the field with our municipalities. So that's a big part of why we wanted to be on this panel. I think, Priscilla, you just flew right past what Providence is doing that is clearly mapped out something that every municipality in Rhode Island can follow, but so can we in Massachusetts. I know where John and I are. We are lucky. We got to see Framingham come together over these last few years and then now see the benefits of that where they're rolling out phase 2. And it's exciting. That was the beginning at that time. And now Providence, what you guys are doing with this plan has not been done at a municipality level yet. And I think that you kind of skirted past really quickly that regardless of the federal funds being stripped away, Mayor Smiley and your entire team is forging ahead. And I don't want that to be lost on the viewers that are listening. That is not easy to do when everything's telling you to slow down. Rhode Island has been the one state in New England that has not slowed down in the sense of projects moving forward. We have felt it, certainly John and I, in Massachusetts in different ways. But as a whole, I think we've all taken that pause. What do we do now? where many programs like OER, Rhode Island Energy, what Providence is doing in their city by forging ahead, regardless of what the winds are shaping like on the federal level is important. So I just want to point that out again and lead by example. And George is doing over at OER is very, very impressive. So again, as an organization, we've spent the last year building a portal that means a lot to us. And it's basically taking the funding sources that are hidden under lots of places and all the other ones that aren't, whether that's Rhode Island Energy and our utility incentives, or whether that's nonprofit organizations that have it, or Climate Job Rhode Island, or many of the other great organizations that I see that I'm looking out and connecting with, and putting it in one easy spot for everybody to find, because these projects that are stalled, they can continue on. It's hard when you put together a resource and know the money is there, and it shouldn't be so hard to find. And so that is a positive thing, not just for New England and how hard that was, but the forward thinkingness of Rhode Island and why this was the perfect state to roll this out to now. Certainly geothermal, we've been able to see it in Massachusetts because we've worked closely with Haley and Aldridge, but now having you guys here in Rhode Island with URI and Brown and many other kind of forward thinking, I want to say cities, but it takes collectively nonprofits, it takes our for-profits, it takes our OER, it takes our Rhode Island Energy, it takes our mayors and sustainability teams to pull it all off. And I think that's important to mention as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, something I've said over the decade, it's all hands on deck. We have a climate crisis, and we have communities that are dealing with the consequences, and some are facing a higher burden than others. And it's a crisis that is really intersecting, right? When we look at, you touched upon, some of our panelists touch upon issues of transportation, for example. But also I had mentioned earlier, as an urban coastal city, we're seeing firsthand what climate change is doing to our city. And at the same time, our residents are dealing with energy affordability challenges. And we also are seeing that there have been decades of disinvestment in our community center spaces. So I think that presents an opportunity. And I think that is the opportunity that Mayor Smiley and our administration is leaning into. And we know that those crises and what our communities face are not going to pause, right? Like the climate change crisis is not going to pause. So it's really up to us. And the mayor sees it this way, it's time, we're going to lean in. The federal government is stepping back, but we're going to be more nimble. We're going to be creative. We're going to be innovative, and we're going to form more partnerships so we can actually continue to do the good work that we've been doing. And I mentioned earlier, we released our decarbonization roadmap, and our director of energy operations is in the audience. And literally since that was signed into law in 2023, David got to work. He got to really doing the deep dive, right, and understanding our portfolio of buildings and working collaboratively with each division to really understand how can we do these strategic investments, and where are the high energy users, where are the opportunities, where are the challenges. And we worked with an energy consortium that does work around the region, Power Options, to develop that decarbonization roadmap with us. And what we found as we were doing the planning was a couple things I mentioned before kicking it back over to our panelists. We found a few things. We found, again, we couldn't pause, right? It's more than planning. We had to go beyond planning. There was an opportunity. There were historic incentives available to us. Our federal delegation is also tremendous in Rhode Island. They were really great at securing earmarks. So there was funding coming our way. So we were not going to say, hey, we're doing the planning. We're not going to, because we knew where the needs were. What we want is a strategic vision so we can continue doing the work. So we started upgrading and electrifying our recreation centers with the funding that was coming in. We started looking at where could we start doing pilots for solar? Where could we work with the utility? We have a strategic energy management partnership with Rhode Island Energy. Which buildings could we deploy lighting controls? Where could we enroll in demand response programs? So we were doing the work. We were like running and sprinting as we were doing the planning. And I think that's what made the milestone of releasing the decarbonization roadmap, like Kristin said, a blueprint for the rest of the state, and made it even more fulfilling because we showed how this work can be done. Yes, the federal government is scaling back and it has a full-blown attack on clean energy, but we're showing the power of what happens when communities and leaders like Mayor Smiley and our city council decide to lean in, right? Because our communities are seeing the benefits of how energy costs are reducing. Therefore, taxpayers are also better off, and we have better buildings, and we're also tackling the climate crisis. So I want to go ahead and kick it over to our panelists. I spoke a little bit so I hinted at some of the opportunities and challenges, but what do you all think are some of you want to speak to something I said? Please do.
I think that it's important to highlight that energy improvement can be a win-win situation, not only for climate change, also for cost and comfort for facilities. Improving having energy investments, we improve comfort in facilities, we decrease long-term and short-term costs and maintenance, and we address the climate crisis. So it's important because if we sometimes say one of the elements, so we think that this has a cost. The actual benefit is in all three areas, and in comfort, and in cost effective, and so it's a win-win situation if we are managed to do the hard work, which is the implementation.
Yes.
And I think this is a component that I would like to discuss today. To emphasize that we have a historic opportunity and the historic challenge. The opportunity is what you just described, and the challenge is to make things happen.
Yeah, the implementation part. And in Providence, we're saying we're going to create a green revolving fund. That's going to help us weather what's going on with the federal government, but also ensures that we will always have dedicated funding for these type of investments. And George, I really appreciate you highlighting that. It's hard to get to the place of implementation, but if you could really look at you cannot just look at the costs, right? If you can look at the big picture and these benefits, I don't know many investments out there where you'll put $1 into energy efficiency and you get $3 back, right? And those are the kind of conversations that we're having with leaders in our city and say, look, not only are we going to improve the space, right, for our residents, but we're actually going to get money back for the city to continue reinvesting. And George, what are other challenges that you see the public sector faces when trying to deploy more clean energy, or even more opportunities? What do you see in your line of work?
I would describe our energy improvements or the change that we want to make as a pyramid. On top of the pyramid, we have the policy. And the policy is something that more or less everybody agrees. Everybody is supportive of a change in the direction of having most cost, not more the energy efficiency feature. So the policy is there. Programs exist. There are federal programs, there are state programs, there are municipal programs. But the base of this pyramid is the actual projects. Things to happen at the level of facility of the building. And the challenge is there that the implementation is not as expected. You hear stories even from the federal government when they approved all this funding for, let's say, charging infrastructure, how many charging infrastructure was able to be implemented at the end of the previous administration. So there is a delay, there is a lag between the decision and the implementation. And I see also a big gap that we have good people in policy, we have good people in programs, but communities, organizations, they don't have energy people to do the work. And the reason there is that for many years, energy improvement was a part of a cycle of 20, 30 years improvements. let's say that every 20, 30 years we have a major renovation, and the organization was able to address all the energy components that upgrade. The last 10 years, energy improvement is a standalone scope. Let's put charge infrastructure, let's put solar, let's electrify the heating. So, and there are not people to support the implementation at the government level, and won't say government, local and state, because that mechanism wasn't there. It's not a decision, the transformation didn't happen as expected. So you go to a school district, you go to a municipality, you go to a state agency, and you try to find the energy person that will be the advocate of that change, and you don't find it. Maybe go to a municipality and you see that the person that is dealing with energy improvement is the CFO. It's great, but it doesn't have the knowledge of the implementation. So there is a lag in implementation because we don't have yet the right people in the right position to make things happen. And I don't say that this happened in a purpose. It happens because we are in a transformation period and things didn't happen at the implementation level as fast as they happen at the policy and program level.
Very interesting insight.
I would like to say something, Georgia, to what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense, and it's almost even more fitting that we're sitting at the CIC building in Providence. And to me, all of those things which have been true for a lot of municipalities, certainly around New England, we're with them all the time. That hasn't been happening in Providence. So I think I almost want to throw back a question, Priscilla, to you guys. And I know David came in, and I am curious because all of those things were still true and you still made it happen. We are out in the field all the time with our municipalities, our mayors, our city council. Some have that poverty mindset, not intentional. It's, we have no money. How do we make this work? They all want to do it. And I would ask those that are watching online, those municipalities, what can you tell them about what made it so different for Providence? Because you have the same obstacles all of us have. What would you tell them?
I mean, I will say, and I say this whenever I'm like at the State House or elsewhere talking about what we're doing in Providence. I know that, as the capital city and the size of a government, we have more resources than most of the smaller cities and towns, right, throughout the city. So we also have more like people resource capital. So I'm fortunate that I have a director of energy operations on my team and also an energy manager, but we didn't get there overnight, and I think that's something that I would think about where you can start. For example, we lean into the resources that we have because it's a small team doing this work. And part of our resources are like, where do we find more capacity? So I mentioned earlier power options. Well, the League of Cities and Towns has a partnership with Power Options, and Power Options provides services like when it comes to solar procurement, when it comes to electricity supply procurement. They actually helped us get going on deploying more electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and then also like Office of Energy Resources. So really like knowing what the landscape of resources looks like, and then using them and leaning into that. And the last thing I will say is our Director of Energy Operations, David Ruggiero, spends a lot of time, and so does our Energy Manager, Andrew Brokolo, with our Public Property Department, right? We're meeting constantly, and it's so exciting to see because we have our folks that are working on facilities saying, oh, when are we going to do this next lighting project? Or like, we have this, we need to find money to actually upgrade this HVAC system. So like we're thinking about these things together and the buy-in there. And same thing with our Parks Department. They're in the business already of being sustainable and providing community center spaces. So always thinking about how they improve the experience for the residents. So I think building those internal partnerships and also external partnerships and tapping into resources is really critical regardless of your size. And then John, please share some wealth about your perspective in geothermal.
Well, you'd mentioned the partnership with local utilities, and it may seem counterintuitive that, say, a natural gas utility, what would their interest be in establishing a district for geothermal, which is clearly adverse to fossil fuels, right? And that's their business. But they're seeing a decline in new natural gas hookups, in part due to municipal incentives and demands for no new fossil fuel hookups in some cases. And yet they also have their existing district of lines with ratepayers. So I think they're looking ahead to see, well, can this essentially be utilized, converted for geothermal and other thermal sources, heating and cooling on a regional scale, or at least a town or a city scale. So they're pretty far looking forward on that. And then for electrical utilities, Eversource, for example, was heavily involved in the Framingham district, geothermal district. And you might say there's some vested interest, right? Because geothermal is electrically driven, but it's very efficient, right? It's even more efficient than air source heat pumps. So they see it as a more, I guess, cost-effective use of the energy they're providing. So there is some interest moving forward in kind of preserving their supplies by making use of more efficient electrical sources.
Yeah, and I love how you frame that in speaking to the utility model, right? The business of providing power and heat is changing, right? And that presents an opportunity as well, and also an opportunity for partnership. And I wanted to ask this follow-up question for you all to chime in on. I've spoken a lot about what Providence is doing. One of the things that we're trying to do is really figure out how to create more public and private partnerships so we can scale up and do bigger projects. Like, we know that there are some sites that could be feasible for geothermal or ground source heat pumps, but we know that there are other buildings, not only public buildings in that area. Like, wouldn't it be great if we create a district heating loop? So maybe even starting back with you, John, like, what are some ways that you've seen, some examples even outside of the state, where there are some other effective public and partnership models? And I think you might also be doing some things here in Rhode Island as well, tied to geothermal, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so we're doing some work for University of Rhode Island, looking at feasibility of geothermal with their Kingston campus, and then designing a standalone system, which would be more of a decentralized geothermal option for their Narragansett Bay campus. I can't say outside of Framingham that there are a lot of examples for public-private partnerships, at least fueling geothermal. And there are only a couple of districts that have been built in the Northeast, one of them being Framingham, the other being Smith College. But those have both, Smith College has funded it on their own. And of course, as I said earlier, Framingham has this partnership with Eversource that's made it happen. So I think that's unique, and that's why it's gotten so much positive publicity and is really seen as a model throughout the country for how municipalities can partner with utilities to make it happen.
Great. Thank you,
Yeah,
John.
and I would like to ask, if you don't mind, Priscilla, about what John's talking about too. I mean, obviously, for those of you who are watching in Rhode Island, you might not know the Framingham, Massachusetts project that we're referring to, but it is a district geothermal. Maybe give people an idea of what that means as a homeowner or renter on the geothermal side, what they did, just for a second, so that I think people can understand. Because we're going to kind of circle back to what David is doing, who I wish we could turn the camera and add a seat and bring you right up here to talk about that, because it is a map. But I think that would be, do you mind, John, kind of telling people to understand it in a simpler way and what it means, dollars and cents?
Yeah, I guess to simplify it a little bit, it's not all that dissimilar from tying into a natural gas line in front of your house, right? So instead of tying into natural gas, you're tying into an ambient loop is typically the term that is circulating fluids. It might be water, or it might be a mix of water and glycol. And then, well, there are two ways to do it. Either you have heat pumps in each individual building that are drawing on the fluids and converting that locally to heating and cooling in the building. Or in the Smith College case, for example, they have large fields that are feeding the geothermal fluids to a thermal plant, and then the thermal plant distributes the cold water and hot water for heating and cooling. So those are essentially the two options. Frankly, I'm not sure which option Framingham went with, but those are, that in essence is the concept for a geothermal district. And one of the real advantages of a district over, say, standalone systems is you can, if you have very different heating and cooling load profiles in a series of buildings. So earlier today, I used the example of labs and hospitals are very cooling dominated, but then residential buildings, dormitories, and the like tend to be very heating dominated. So when you can have a mix or a cross section of buildings like that, you can bring the whole system into balance. And that balance between heating and cooling is really critical for efficient long-term operation.
Yeah, and I think to that point of why I had him bring that up is we have a lot of municipalities that have these standalone, really great programs that are not just clean and renewable, what you see on the surface, but certainly bigger projects that affect residents like we have in Framingham. But I want to add that you kind of mentioned a little bit about these projects and funding and things like that. I know Milton Cat, their MC2 division that John and I have sat on listening to them today, and that private funding that they're doing, your team is probably familiar with what Wakefield, their new energy park, did over there, not just with their energy storage systems, but kind of advancing that, which originally started because of the school. It has now become a model. That still is not, it's these separate great things in and of themselves are incredible, and we keep moving forward. So George is right when we're talking about policy, connecting that with partnerships, connecting that with funding. But then I circle back to what Providence is doing, because what you guys are doing here isn't just one project. These are multiple things. And you are stacking the funding in a sense, and it's something we've talked about all day. And you're doing this in a current climate that isn't set up for a city to succeed as well as it has. And so I do tend to want to circle back, Priscilla, once again, to what your entire team, and I know led by David and Mayor Smiley and your city council, and all of the other people who, sit behind that curtain that are essential, because it really is a model here in Providence. And if it can be done here, it can be done at this level throughout New England. And I don't mean just our Western Mass states, like Holyoke or other towns like that, but larger municipalities throughout New England. And they're trying that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think with Providence, the thing that we think about, whether we're in the space of clean energy or resilience, like how do we create that blueprint that is replicable, that can be replicated elsewhere? Like I hinted at earlier, municipalities, like we share a lot of resources in terms of the information in between local government and even state government. And I would love to also, George, going back to George, because in that stacking of funding that you're talking about, and I think where it's essential to work in partnership with the Office of Energy Resources. I know early on, before we even had our energy efficiency and carbon neutral ordinance and that directive, we were looking at managing 1,000 utilities for the city of Providence. Not many have 1,000 utilities, and there are buildings that at the time we didn't own, but we said, wow, this is a big bill. They're consuming a lot of energy in terms of, for example, electricity. How do we stabilize those costs? And it's like, well, we got to invest in more energy efficiency. And I remember our team working with OER and being able to secure some funding to do some lighting upgrades in one of those facilities. So I would love for you to also talk, George, a little bit more about like what are some of the other clean energy projects that your office is supporting municipalities like Providence and elsewhere.
Thank you for the opportunity. There are things that happened the last few years in Rhode Island that they are important highlighting. So in Rhode Island, right now, I think we must be national leaders in streetlights LED implementation. I think more than 95% of Rhode Island streetlights are LED. We changed the law more than 10 years ago, so cities and towns would be able to manage their own lights, and that happened the last 10 years.
We took advantage of that in Providence.
Providence was a leader in this effort. So we're talking about more than 100,000 streetlights that were converted the last 10 years to LED. That shows that across the board, all municipalities were able to coordinate and make the investment with support from the utilities, support from OER, and so that's a great example of make change happen. In Rhode Island, the last 5-6 years, we also implementing a very robust electric vehicle charging infrastructure. OER is implementing a $30 million program to support this transition with funding to municipalities and private entities to install charging infrastructure. Currently, we have in place a public charging infrastructure that has more than 150 chargers, not chargers, 150 chargers, yes. And there are many things happening in the near future. So besides charging infrastructure and besides LEDs, OER provides funding for specific school districts to do energy upgrades. We have an active program that we provide all the necessary funds, technical and financial, for school districts to implement energy efficiency. We just finished a cycle for municipal buildings, and we're opening a new one in the next month or so. So constantly something happens to support from our office local government. And I think it's a great opportunity for every municipality to take advantage of that. We are not a big state. OER is there. I always say that if any municipality has something in mind that has energy component, discussion it's a good thing to start with the energy office, at least to provide the right direction and try to find the resources to make things faster and easier.
And Niall, just a quick follow-up for you, George, when you're also having these conversations with municipalities, because I mentioned earlier that one of the drivers out of many drivers in terms of why we make these investments in clean energy is that we see it as a path toward stabilizing our energy costs. Are those some of the conversations that are also being had with other municipalities where they're saying, whoa, I look at what's happening to our electricity load? Like, what do you recommend to OER?
Yes, so I know that Providence is doing that, but many other municipalities, we connect with them to do energy procurement and stabilize in a long-term contracts the energy expense. A huge opportunity for municipalities is also the virtual net metering program that provides the benefit to reduce their cost at a significant level. Providence.
Yeah, absolutely. We get for offsite solar through the virtual net metering program, we get $1.5 million in electric bill savings every year. The majority of that is actually consumed by our schools. So again, showing the impact of what happens with policy and programs through implementation, but also we are on track. And I'm looking at David, is it by 2030, we will take ownership of those renewable energy certificates and be able to claim the environmental benefits of that, right? In terms of what the city is doing to drive emissions. Of course, we're also working to deploy solar, microgrids, and battery storage as well. But packaged up, right? It's a pretty good financial package for a municipality.
Correct. And something that provides a huge benefit, financial benefit for municipalities. The state already doing that for years now. We have 100% of our electricity with produced by green energy. I will repeat again, there are opportunities, there are many resources. At the municipal level, unfortunately, there are not people always to know all these programs. It needs from our end effort to communicate that, but we also extend an invite that discussing with the utility, discussing with the state energy office, we can coordinate efforts to make this happen.
And John and Kristin, anything you want to add to that point of how clean energy is also a path to energy affordability and why it's so essential?
Yeah, I can just say it's less about the affordability, but the reason geothermal, air source heat pumps, and other electrification strategies work very well in the Northeast and in New England proper is we have a clean grid, right? So even though both Rhode Island and Massachusetts still are pretty heavily reliant on natural gas, there's very little coal firing at either of these electrical grids. Whereas you go to other parts of the country where, because they're rich in coal resources, the grid is predominantly coal-fired power plants. And from a holistic standpoint, you have to ask the question, does electrification really make much sense here? Because I'm replacing a very efficient natural gas boiler in my home with electrical energy that's supplied by a coal-fired power plant. So the fact that we have a very green grid with renewables, we've got some nuclear, at least in Massachusetts, that's really what helps fuel any electrification strategy, including geothermal.
I would like to add something here. Geothermal was a big thing for New England the previous years because it was the only sustainable alternative to natural gas, right? I mean, the climate of our area has as the alternative solution to natural gas or oil in terms of electrification, oil, geothermal technology. However, the last 5 years or so, the heat pump technology, or air source now, right, it's has evolved at a degree that geothermal is not the only heat pump technology to provide that benefit. Of course, it has other advantages, but now we have in our tool set of electrification also air source heat pumps that can provide a sustainable solution all year long with a much easier implementation, right, at a different cost. Again, I don't want to compare the level of quality of geothermal, but we have a new tool set of heat pumps that can provide electrification as the main source of heating for commercial buildings. A solution that we didn't have 10 years ago, right? Now we have it, and it's cost effective. Sometimes when I have discussion about this thing with stakeholders, they say, well, that's expensive because geothermal was less. I mean, compares it is. But now we have also for smaller buildings or for cases that we don't have the ability to do geothermal because we don't have the space to do the boring. We have the solution of air source heat pumps that provide currently cheaper, much more cost-effective energy compared to natural gas, which is something that most people don't know. In their mind, whatever comes from electricity is more expensive than natural gas. That's not the case anymore. We have electrification, we have heat pumps, air source heat pumps for commercial and residential buildings that can provide very cost-effective.
And Priscilla, I would like to answer that in a even a more peeled back, simpler way, just from a different vantage point on why clean energy, why renewable. We are in New England the third highest utility costs across the board, New England, other than Hawaii and California. So we have to pipe it in. So that you've seen fossil fuels continue to steadily rise, right? Yet when I come to Rhode Island, which is all the time, I go with Tesla, charged it up. It was $8.47 3 days ago. But if you look at gas prices, the average is what, $4.50 a gallon? Is that where we roughly are here? I know that's what it was in Massachusetts 2 days ago. That is what clean energy does. That's just one piece of it. That's not even touching the surface on what geothermal can do on a district type program, what our solars are doing on top of these buildings on the resident's home. What does that actually mean? That means lower costs. Your bills go down when you invest in clean energy, whether that is as a company, whether that is a homeowner, and now programs even for renters that they could take advantage. That is proven. That is the only thing that is continued to decrease costs, right? Where our fossil fuels and the things that we rely on that we can't get away from continue to rise. That is what everybody in this room certainly understands, but we want people that are listening to know on what that means in dollars and cents, because we're all paying a utility bill, right? We are all either filling up the gas or hopefully plugging in. Thanks to everything OER, Rhode Island Energy, what Providence has done with those superchargers, thank you very much. Very appreciative. They're all over the city now. We see it a lot in Massachusetts as well, more prevalent here in Providence than ever before, at least since I've been coming up the last 8 months and since our last Clean Energy Week. Huge improvements. Those are dollar and cents that all of us understand when that bill comes versus what we're paying.
And certainly OER gets credit for those superchargers. But I will add that something so essential that you've brought up, Kristin, is when we think about fossil fuels, right? They're going to continue to be volatile, right? There's a war in Iran, that's going to be reflected in those fossil fuels, the fossil fuel pricing, right? So it's those externalities, and that's not even accounting for the impact that those emissions, right, are having in our communities. So really, when we think about clean energy, there are like short-term gains and also long-term gains in terms of how it stabilizes costs. But also it's a much more reliable source, right? When we think about everything it provides. So before we open it up to the audience for Q&A in the few minutes that we have together, any closing thoughts about there's so many opportunities, so much potential. Of course, there are barriers and challenges. For a community that hasn't started or is thinking about where to start, what would you advise coming from your perspective and your line of work? Maybe starting with George?
I will repeat what I said before. The community has to invest in people, has to invest in people in energy. So as an organization, every municipality, every local entity, school district, they need to have a person that has an expertise to navigate the area, because it's a technical area and you cannot make the investments needed. We cannot have the opportunity. You cannot take advantage of the opportunities unless you know how to navigate space.
And George, I will say, from example and leading on that, I mean, we price out like how much money in savings is coming back to the city tied to our energy positions. And I mean, you know, we're talking, it could be for one employee benefits, salary over 100,000 plus. But we're calculating there are millions of dollars that are going to be coming back to the city over the next few years. So that just shows the power, right, behind when you have dedicated staffing on that. So great point.
That is a good point, and I would like to add to that for anybody listening, the responsibility falls on each of us, whether you're a homeowner, whether you're a renter, whether you're a business owner, whether you run a nonprofit. There are a lot of resources out there, but it takes us taking the time to just buckle down and say, okay, where do we need to find it? What resources are available to us? Because if you rely simply on what you watch on the news, you will think there is nothing out there that can help us as an organization, that can help a company, that can help a small business in Providence figure out how to pay their utility bill without actually reaching out to Brett Bellman, who runs the energy efficiency team over at Rhode Island Energy. Not reaching out to Chris Kearns and many of the team, Shauna and Abby, any of them at OER, and seeing such incredible programs right at their fingertips, and then reaching out to their local government and saying, what resources do we have? It is there. And I think that was one of the things we learned as an organization building this portal, was that the money's available. And if we just kind of buckle down and say, let's look at the positives. If you're a municipality that's struggling, I hope you listen to this and reach out to Providence, reach out to the teams there and ask them, what did you do with this? How did this work? What resources do we have? Let's blow up David's phone and the hotlines in Providence. If you are a small business anywhere in Rhode Island and you wonder, can I put solar? Would this make sense? I would encourage you to go to Rhode Island Energy's energy efficiency teams. Look at what they have. There is a ton of programs right at your fingertips that you can use. The same is true about OER. So I guess I just want to kind of reiterate that it still falls on all of us to take the time to actually research what all of these people have done for you and programs that are available, and know that it cannot be done alone. That we need OER, we need Rhode Island Energy, we need great municipalities run by great mayors to continue that work, even when it doesn't look pretty and even when the financing is hard to find.
That's great, Kristin. And I will say also, in our roles, if you have challenges and barriers, we'll listen, right? Because the power of information is that then we can learn how to overcome them and create solutions that will benefit you. And John, anything you want to add in closing before we open it up to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, so much of it is in the planning, particularly trying to apply geothermal in a city, right? So you think, wow, geothermal district sounds great. Boston's a progressive city. Providence too. Can we serve multiple buildings from a geothermal district? But it's a huge commitment just to work around the existing utilities. You know, it can be millions of dollars just to relocate those utilities and create a clean slate, essentially, to build the district. So it's just one of many tools in the toolbox. George mentioned air source heat pumps. This is why they're quite often they're just easier to fit into an urban site. They're not as capital intensive, and they're frankly not as complicated. The permitting alone, working geothermal in an urban setting, can be really challenging. So you want to know that early on before you start spending a lot of money pilot testing boreholes and doing geothermal design. I'm
looking at David. We're taking note. John, we'll be reaching out.
Angle drilling, that's David. That's what a lot of companies are doing in Massachusetts, because again, it's all pavement, right? We can't tear down a whole building, but angle drilling, that's pretty phenomenal. 200 feet by 200 feet, John? is the space roughly that they need?
No, sorry. It's the final product might take up a quarter of this room. It's a very small platform, so they'll space the boreholes very close to one another, 3 to 5 feet, and then they achieve the separation which you need for good thermal exchange by varying the angles of the inclined boreholes. So it looks very good on paper, but you should know, again, back to the planning and logistics, it's still a sizable platform to get it in the ground. It's still 100 by 100 feet essentially needed for the drilling in order to actually get the exchangers in the ground. But it's definitely a good option for any site where you're constrained for space.
Thank you, John. So, and thank you to our panelists. We have about 7 more minutes together, so I want to see if there are some questions in the audience. I certainly have more questions, and we have more thoughts we can share with you, but want to see if there are any thoughts or questions in the audience.
Not all at once.
Well, I will add, thinking about some of those challenges that you mentioned, John, and also like the permitting and the drilling. I think one of the things, one of our other recent takeaways, we received a grant from the Coalition for Green Capital and ICLEI for $250,000 to do some technical support work and literature review work. So that's how we were able to figure out how do we create a green revolving fund that works for the city of Providence. But what we also did, we convened stakeholders from around the city that are interested in decarbonization or are thinking about projects. And the power of convening really came through, right? Where we saw this network forming of folks that are thinking about how to solve some of these very problems. And one of our stakeholders that joined one of our focus group conversations was Brown University, and they were talking about their project that they're doing around the area, geothermal ground source heat pumps. And they said, oh, we've actually done drilling in some areas around the city. Like, we'll share that information with you so you don't have to spend those dollars, right? So again, the power of convening there. But if anyone has any other thoughts or you want to add to that, but it really shined through for me. Go ahead, George.
I want to take the opportunity and advertise a new program of our office.
Please.
So it's about energy storage batteries. Electricity as a commercial application is about 140 years old. It's the 1880s when we have the first commercial application of electricity in New York. A year later, we had electricity here in Providence. So since then, our market has a very unique characteristic. We need to consume electricity only the time we produce it. We have to synchronize production and consumption all the time. And that's a very difficult component, very unique for our industry. However, this model changes with the energy storage. It's the first time, the last 10 years now, we have the ability to store energy when we have abundance of energy and consume it later. So the Rhode Island provides the first rebate standalone program for residential and small commercial energy storage. Our website provides all the information. The gist is we provide rebates to purchase and install a battery. If you have already solar and you want to add now a battery, this is a good opportunity. Rhode Island Energy provide incentives for performance. So as you have the battery, you have revenues from the battery. So if you add the rebate to buy and the revenues from having it, it's a very cost-effective solution to invest. So yeah, that's a new program from OER.
That's fantastic, George. And it gets me thinking about one of the projects that we currently have under development is a new Department of Public Works DPW facility and garage. And for that, it has a battery storage component. And looking at the numbers and that revenue coming back, it was really nice and really helped sell the other components of the project as well. And then I also know that Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources, you all are ahead in thinking about siting of these larger battery storage facilities and have put out a model ordinance, which I think it's super proactive and appreciated, because I know we were once at a place where solar and our forests were in competition. So we had to learn the right way about, how can we drive development outside of our natural resources that we rely on also as carbon sinks. So really appreciate that policy and programmatic approach. And now looking at John and Kristin, any closing thoughts or anything else you would like to add that we have not touched upon? I will tell you my that we have not touched upon, but I do want to stress that towards the end of this panel, we also in the city of Providence, we are a climate job city, which means that it really matters how we get to our emission reductions, and it's just as important that our communities see the benefits, right, in this transition to a clean energy economy, that they see themselves in it. So one of the things we're going to be doing over the next couple of years is really looking at what does it mean for the city of Providence. Like, how many jobs are we talking about? It was really great at the Green Revolving Fund announcement to be standing next to Joe Walsh from IBW Local 99 and next to the men and women that are going to be installing the solar panels and the new apprentice that's going to be learning on the job.
Yeah, that's a good. Joe was on an earlier panel and he touched on that. So yeah, I agree. I think I would say to anyone listening that if you are a small business or a medium-sized business, or you're a municipality, or you're a renter or a homeowner, and there's things you're struggling, whether that's getting a project off the ground, or if it's trying to figure out how do I move forward, get these clean energy projects that will lower my bill without having to come out of pocket. And I think that's what our portal does so perfectly. And I want people to understand that they can reach out to us. We can run it through our portal at no cost to them and find funding that's available to them that will help them, connect them with OER, connect them with Brett's team over at Rhode Island Energy, connect them with Rhode Island Commerce on some incredible grants that they have, and then show you how you can stack it, because that's really the key to all of this, especially on the commercial side of things, and we'll help you do all of that. We're known for our flagship Clean Energy Weeks. Those are fun. Those are a lot of behind the scenes. It's a week of great north, south, east, west across the state. But what we spend the rest of the year on is actually helping businesses get these projects off the ground, connecting them with the right businesses that can help them do that. And now with this portal being in 6 languages that we are very proud of, and then also being open to renters and homeowners. So we want you to reach out to northeastrec.org, ask us what's out there, and let us find it for you.
It's fantastic. And John?
No, I think I'm good.
John's our closer. Great. Well, thank you all very much for the time.
You didn't.
I think we just